Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we will talk about domestic flights resuming in the country and the clash between the center and the states about it. We will also talk about the lack of COVID 19 testing facilities in India and why this problem has serious implications now. But first, we talk about Cyclone Ampan. Last week, West Bengal was hit by one of the worst cyclones that the region had seen in decades. So far, at least 86 people have died because of it. Cyclone Ampan has also destroyed livelihoods, flooded agricultural lands, and has left the state struggling with essential services like drinking water, drainage, and electricity. In the first segment, Shantanu Chaudhary, who reports on West Bengal for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about the damage the cyclone has done to the state. Shantanu, Cyclone Ampan has been one of the worst cyclones to hit West Bengal in decades. Could you talk about the kind of destruction it has left in its wake?
Well, on the afternoon of May 19, when the cyclone started making landfall, it reached a wind speed of around 150 to 170 km in coastal areas. And the devastation was very great. Actually, it left a trail of destructions and it uprooted many trees. It flattened very pakka house, kacha house, and it also destroyed electrical poles and also destroyed many vehicles which were standing in front of the trees. So this was the scene in the coastal areas. So far, what we have got to know from the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, over 5,000 trees have fallen in Kolkata. And some of them had fallen on the roads, which has blocked the traffic movement completely. Some of them fallen on the houses, which were partially damaged. So far, there has been no electricity in almost 70% of the city. People are still protesting. People are on the roads. They are holding road blockades, demanding electricity and water supply. Due to the lack of electricity, there has been no water supply in some of the high rises and apartments. So there is growing discontent among the people against the administration for not taking adequate measures to bring back the electricity or to restart the water supply.
Could you also talk about how have these problems been compounded by the fact that there is a coronavirus outbreak going on?
Yeah, this is just like a double impact for the West Bengal government because on one hand, it was tackling the virus. I mean, there was a large spike in the number of infections. Firstly, the state government wasn't doing multiple tests, and now the testing have gone up. Today, the state government is conducting 8,000, 9,000 tests per day, and also the cases are also going up. So on one hand, state was a bit struggling to cope up with the COVID-19 situations. On the other, the emergence of the Shramik Special States, which brought migrant laborers from other states, this also compounded the problems. And now this cyclone, which was originally not supposed to hit so dangerously in West Bengal, it had actually made a lot of devastations in the coastal areas, so also in Kolkata and South Chobis Pargana districts, North Chobis Pargana districts. So we can say that state government didn't think that the devastation would be that big. So this has actually compounded the problem because what we are seeing from the ground reality is that they don't have the machinery to tackle such a big problem, because what we are seeing is that complete failure of the administration, as the trees were left on the roads for 3 days, 4 days, and there has been no such personnel, KMC personnel, which was working day and night. That's the reason why the government was forced to call army, and 5 columns of army personnel was deployed yesterday to clear the roads. So we can see from that move that how ill prepared the state government was to tackle this kind of a disaster.
So right now, we are recording this on a Sunday afternoon, and so far the death toll of Cyclone Amphan has been 86. Do we have any idea as to what have been reasons for the majority of these deaths?
Actually, most of the deaths were occurred due to the trees which fell on people, and also because of some of the walls collapsed on the people who were taking shelter while the storm was wreaking havoc. And another reason for this death is electrocution, because the electrical poles had snapped and some of the electrical poles were uprooted. So this was also another reason why so many people have lost their lives.
Like you mentioned, there have been thousands of trees that have been uprooted. There have been significant destruction to the environment. The Sundarbans have been severely hit. While covering this, you spoke to environmentalists in the region. What do they have to say about all this?
Well, but they are very concerned because large part of the mangrove also destroyed, and this also disrupts the ecological balance in the state. I mean, this mangrove actually has been using as a buffer zone this has been taking a lot of impact of the cyclones whenever it came, be it Afoni, be it Bulbul last year. So now this part is damaged. So the direct impact will be on the cities and towns. This is the one part of what the experts are saying. Another part is that a large number of trees which have fallen are very old trees, and some of them are 180 years old. So get back the green cover of the city, it will take a long time. At least the experts are saying that at least 10 to 15 years will take to get the green cover which have been lost due to the cyclone Amphan. They are also pointing another factor that the lack of planning for plantation of the trees in the streets, selection of wrong plants for the as avenue trees, which also led to this kind of problem because the trees fell, they uprooted, they destroyed the pavements because some beautification around the base of the trees, which also prevented the trees to go deep into the soil. So that's also one of the reasons why so many trees fell, because they had weak base. Another problem, which reason for so many trees have fallen.
Okay, so what kind of measures has the government taken so far to tackle this situation?
On the day of the cyclone, Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee had appealed to the central government for assistance and support. And a day later, Prime Minister Narendra Modi came to West Bengal and did an aerial survey of the destroyed districts. And later, he held a meeting with the Chief Minister and he announced an initial package of 1,000 crore. That's what has been promised initially. A central team will come and assess the entire situation, then further allotments will be made. But so far, what we are seeing from the ground reality is that nothing has been done to remove the trees and the lampposts from the roads. That is the reason why the state government called for the help of the army, Indian Army. And as a result, 5 columns of Indian Army personnel were deployed in Kolkata yesterday to clear the roads, to clear the trees. And this actually shows us how ill-prepared the state government was to tackle this kind of disaster. And today we get to know that 10 more NDRF teams have arrived in Kolkata to carry out the rescue operations. So this is the ground reality right now. The rescue operations is on, but mostly by the NDRF and the Indian Army. State government is still holding meetings with the district officials and trying to disburse as much money as possible. We got to know from the state government that the central government has already disbursed the amount, the initial 1,000 crore. So state government is asking its panchayats, the municipal bodies, civic bodies to disburse money as soon as possible to the affected families. This is kind of going on, but at the ground reality, a lot needs to be done right now because still people are living without electricity, without water supply, and this has actually led to protests and road blockades in many places.
It is also important to note that apart from the visible destruction that a cyclone causes, there are also a lot of hidden costs involved. For example, livelihood experts point out that often it takes years for agricultural land to regain its soil fertility after being destroyed by a storm. Fishermen in the region may not get the same catch for a number of seasons, and a single cattle death in a poor family can come as a grave burden. All these costs are much harder to calculate. After the Ministry of Civil Aviation took the decision last week, a number of domestic flights are set to resume today. Passenger air services all across the country have remained suspended since 25th of March due to the nationwide lockdown. The decision, however, caused a clash between the states and the centre, particularly with Maharashtra saying that it does not want domestic flights to operate in the state right now. In this segment, Pranab Mukul, who reports on aviation for the newspaper, joins us to shed light on the situation. The conversation took place last evening. Pranab, last week, the Ministry of Civil Aviation had decided to resume domestic flights. And along with that, it had said that it would put a cap on price tickets. It also issued guidelines saying, masks would be mandatory. There would be compulsory web check-in and one would have to download the Aarogya Setu app. And then the Civil Aviation Minister Hardeep Singh Puri on Saturday said that there was also no need for states to quarantine passengers after they arrive. And since then, there has been a lot of confusion about what actually needs to happen. Different states have reacted differently. Could you explain to our listeners what this entire confusion is about?
So basically, what we understand from states is that there was not a lot of consultation that happened from the center's end, or at least that's the sense that we're getting. But in the SOPs that the center had issued, they had given a free hand to the states to issue their own health protocols, and any passenger who's arriving into a particular state was asked to be mindful of the individual state health protocols that are being issued. So some states are of the belief that they don't want to have passengers coming from all around the country. They don't want people coming into their state borders from all around the country. It's just what happened in the last 2 months globally. It's happening at a smaller scale within India's states. So now states are being very, very cautious about who they are allowing to enter.
And Maharashtra basically, also came out and said that it does not want domestic flights to operate from this state. What were the reasons for them saying that? And then what has been the final decision regarding that? And what happens in this case when, a state government doesn't want flights to operate, but, the center has issued different guidelines?
Civil aviation is a center subject. State governments cannot really disallow flights from landing or disallow people from deboarding from flights. But the issue that they can create is, airports flying. All of this needs a complementary mobility infrastructure that is in states' hands. Provision of public transport, allowing private vehicles, taxis to go to the airports. All that can be stymied. All that can be used by the states to stymie the flight operations. But eventually, in case of Maharashtra also, as you asked, now in Mumbai, starting tomorrow, 25 flights, 25 departures and 25 arrivals will start. So it's a much curtailed schedule than what was even expected. But, that's what the state governments are up to. They're being cautious. They don't want a sudden rush of people coming in. So they're starting this gradually and will probably ramp it up going ahead.
So how many flights in total will start from tomorrow?
Okay, so we don't have an exact number as to how many flights will start from tomorrow, because a lot of state governments are still in process of taking their decisions as to whether they want them to be allowed as per the center's SOPs of having 1/3 flights from metros to metros, from metros to non-metros and so on. But what a lot of state governments have also done is that now they are issuing orders for compulsory quarantine of arriving passengers. So that really acts as a damp squib for someone who's looking to travel. So we're also not sure how many passengers would actually fly, and consequent to that, we don't know whether the airline would be eventually operating that flight if it doesn't have enough passengers on a particular aircraft.
Why has the ministry, the civil aviation ministry, started to resume domestic flight? What was the reason for that? Is it the reason the economics of it, the fact that a lot of flights are struggling? Because people can take precautions, and you can download Arogya Setu app, you can wear masks, but the fact is that we don't know to what extent this will add to the virus spreading. So considering all of that, what has led to this decision of starting flights?
So what we learned from speaking to government officials and airline executives is that the airlines were awaiting huge package in the stimulus announcements that were made by the finance minister, but that really did not happen. What the finance minister announced for the aviation sector were a number of decisions that were already announced beforehand. So it was much lesser than what was anticipated by the industry. So to that extent, the next best thing for the industry was for the government to allow them to resume flights, because right from the basic equipment that airlines have, which is the aircraft, from there to the entire airline company, everything is contingent on planes being in the air, customers flying. So because unlike manufacturing industry, once you lose an aircraft day, if the aircraft is not flying, then that revenue is lost forever. There's no way to recover that revenue, when compared with, say, a biscuit or a garment or something that may stay on the shelf for a while and sell later. So that's what we understand, and we have learned from speaking to government officials, that this was one of the reasons that airlines were also demanding that we didn't get a good enough package. Now please allow us to resume flights. So this is something that we've gathered from our conversations.
What have states now been requesting from the center? Because, they have expressed their frustrations with, center guidelines clashing with the state ones.
So initially, the center was, like we also reported a day ago, that Minister of Civil Aviation Hardeep Singh Puri had said that there is no real need for people to be quarantined if they pass a certain number of parameters. But states, again, they're trying to be very, very cautious about who they're allowing into their borders. So today, the health ministry has issued guidelines that says that again, states are free to issue their own health protocols and for domestic passengers arriving into the states. So this was one of the main pain points for the states, that they'd want to ensure that whoever is coming into their borders does not contribute to the spread of the virus more.
After our conversation, there were two updates about the situation. One, that Civil Aviation Minister Hardeep Singh Puri tweeted that except Andhra Pradesh and West Bengal, domestic flights will recommence across the country from tomorrow. He said that as per the request of the state government, operations in Andhra Pradesh will commence on a limited scale from the 26th of May, while flights in West Bengal will start from the 28th of May. The second update was that a number of states announced their respective quarantine measures for the arriving passengers. Some require all flyers to do a 14-day quarantine after they arrive, and some require 7 days if tested negative. Whether the quarantine will be at home, a government facility, or a paid facility depends from state to state. We have provided a link to these guidelines in today's episode description. In the end, we talk about India's testing facilities. As the novel coronavirus spreads wider in the country with relaxations in the lockdown and the increase in travel, a recent analysis of hospital inventory has shown that there are glaring gaps in testing facilities in states that are recording new cases. This is particularly significant at a time when lakhs of migrants are returning to their villages in different parts of the country. In this segment, Karishma Mehrotra, who reported on the story, joins us to explain this problem and its implications. Karishma, experts have said that we will see a surge in the number of cases in June. We also have had several restrictions relaxed in the lockdown. Flights will begin operating from today. And of course, lakhs of migrant workers have been heading back home to their villages. You recently wrote about the lack of testing facilities across the country. What are the kind of gaps we see in that area, and what concerns do they raise, especially, considering all of this?
So one of the things that we have started hearing about quite often, looking through, stories coming in from across the country, is a increasing backlog of pending test results, a lot of delayed results in testing, which have pretty significant consequences on those who, if they have an emergency situation or an emergency procedure. I mean, technically, those results are not supposed to impact emergency situations, but the reality is that pending test results have a very large impact on people's lives. So one of the things that I found that could potentially be a reason for the increasing backlog is that the vast majority of districts that have even one case of COVID-19 don't have a testing lab within their boundaries. So that's over 2/3 of the 630 districts that have at least one case. Now, this isn't to say that every district necessarily needs to have a testing lab facility in order to get the lab results tested. Many major urban centers are testing samples coming in from neighboring districts. So that's quite common. But it's just to show that there's definitely a skew in where the labs are across the country. For example, half of the country's testing labs are only in 5 states. And yes, those 5 states do have heavy load of cases. So it's important that those states also have significant numbers in labs: Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Gujarat. But the thing is that we're starting to see some surges in states, a lot of that due to the migrant influx.
For example, in Uttar Pradesh, at least 60% of more than 2,200 COVID-19 cases confirmed in the last 10 days were migrants who returned to the state in the past few weeks. Another example is Kerala, which on Saturday reported its single biggest day spike. The surge that the state has seen in the past 2 weeks has primarily been due to the return of migrants from Middle East and from hotspots in other parts of the country, especially Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu.
And these states have far fewer testing labs in their states: UP, Orissa, Bihar. And even as ICMR has really ramped up the number of labs that are doing testing across the country, end of March, it was only around 70. In April, it reached up to 200s, and now it's in the 500s. But the new labs that are getting added are also being added to, the big major hotspot states: Karnataka, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Delhi, Gujarat, West Bengal, Telangana. So the states that we might begin to see surges in, having some very, very fast growth, like Bihar, they only saw 26 new labs. Bihar, Odisha, and Uttar Pradesh, only 26 new labs were introduced there this month. So one of the considerations that might become an issue is the sort of concentration and spread of testing labs in the country.
Could you talk about to what degree we have increased this testing, over these past couple of weeks?
So yeah, testing in the country has definitely ramped up, not only over the past couple of weeks, but over the past couple of months. We reached a new goalpost, which was 1 lakh tests per day, has been happening over the past 5-6 days. But we've been steadily increasing our testing numbers. It was roughly 50,000 daily at the end of April, moved up to 75,000 daily by May 3rd. Now it's become 1 lakh. There are calls to increase that testing even more as domestic test kit production has also been ramped up significantly. So, we're just going to start seeing more and more need to analyze these tests to get results for those people who have been tested. So test reading capacity in the country definitely needs to be ramped up as well. And while it has been ramped up, my story just shows that it's still concentrated in select districts and it's not as spread out as we're seeing the spread of new cases.
What kind of challenges does the government face in increasing testing facilities? Is it just money? Is it just getting people to build them? Is it also, getting professionals in certain areas where they might not exist?
Yeah, so the folks that I spoke to about this definitely harp on one specific aspect, which is very important. Trained personnel, technicians, that's one of the most essential criteria for testing lab facilities. I spoke to an ICMR official when the agency was really just ramping up. They had yet to invite private labs into the lab network. And at that time, the scientists had told me that one of their biggest worries in expanding the network was biosafety and biosecurity. So, contamination of the samples, false positive, false negatives. You have to protect the lab worker as well. Once ICMR moved out of their own domain, they have their own 72 labs. Once they began moving out of that domain, that meant reaching into labs that they don't have as much of an inspection process on. A lot of those labs they've never visited, they don't understand or know their capacity. So at that time, when they were just beginning the process of really significantly ramping up the testing lab facilities, they were doing a very judicious sort of virtual and video inspection and assessment of the labs that were being assigned. Also in early April, there were guidelines set out by ICMR about which new labs could apply to test samples. While those guidelines are no longer in place, it does give you a little bit of sense of what their priorities were when the network was beginning to ramp up. So the districts that had more than 100 cases per day were the ones that were allowed to have new laboratories apply to become testing lab centers. And also they had to have a current laboratory that was more than 250 kilometers away. So that gives you the range in which a testing lab might be taking samples from. And if there were other labs in that vicinity of 250 kilometers, then those labs would have to be testing less than 100 samples a day. So again, this was an April notice, so it's not necessarily pertinent now. But the other advisory that ICMR put out in April when they were expanding the network, it delineated a lot of the requirements that these facilities had to have. So there's a lot of equipment that is mostly imported, from what I've heard of many hospital directors, for RNA extraction, the PCR machines, deep freezers, PPE equipment. And like I said, the trained personnel is one of the most important things. ICMR requires at the minimum 5 people. They have to have experience in molecular virology and training in handling viral samples. And I spoke to the AIMS director in Patna, who had also told me that trained personnel and the specific, often imported equipment was very important. But the thing he said was, as of now, he finds his city and his state to be relatively comfortable as far as their labs go and as far as the numbers they're seeing as of now. But he gave room to say if tomorrow things change significantly, then of course the resources they have now could begin to fall short, which is always sort of the case. So they have been increasing the facilities as much as possible, he told me.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.